Everybody, this is Chris Jerome with the Radical Independent, and I'm here with Charlie Grapski. He has an interesting Substack called Party is the Problem: How America Lost Its Constitution and the Promise of Democracy. We share some similar themes, Radical Independent, I feel, Charlie, with your Substack. I talk about a corrupt rigged duopoly, how our system is pretty anti-democratic, pretty dysfunctional. Before we get into the Substack, could you give us a little bit of your background and kind of your influences?
Well, I have a number of degrees, but most of my postgraduate degrees are in politics and law,
All
the
right.
history of law, the history of politics, the philosophy of politics, the philosophy of law, jurisprudence, and things like that. And I studied democracy and what it is and what it isn't, uh, and I study the role of political parties in that and how they conflict with both the Constitution and democracy.
Right. I mean, politics in general is pretty corrosive, right? No matter how you do it, it's not only corrupting to the representatives, but it tends to bring out the worst in voters. Politics is kind of unsavory. We have to deal with it at some level. But I guess the big trick is how do we have our system function without the politics becoming a real detriment? But you talk about reducing the power of political parties. So I guess my big question is, how do we reduce that power, short term and long term? How do we get from here to there?
Well, a great place to start when you're talking about the Constitution, democracy, and political parties is Madison's Federalist 10, because he does an amazing job in a very short space of really articulating the theory of modern representative democracy
Right.
and how parties are antithetical to it.
Right.
And what what Madison argues quite effectively is that if you want liberty, you're not going to be able to get rid of parties exist by nature, human nature. They're going to come about. The thing is to design a government in its institution and its processes such that it neutralizes and negates parties, party and faction, and the party spirit. And the way to do that, he argued, is to have a very large republic with very diverse views, not two points of view, but multiple points of view.
Right.
And a representative government ought to mirror that multiplicity of voices
Yeah.
and not be reduced down to just two. And if you had a system in which there were numerous small parties, as well as the ability for independence and the ability not to use parties, they would negate each other and have to come together and engage in a discourse, which is the very definition of democracy and the very point of representative government.
Yeah.
Political public policy should be created within the legislative branch. It should not be created in a party backroom, created in a party platform, pushed by a president, and then have the party endorse it with a vote. There should be deliberation. I mean, that the whole point of having a representative body is to have deliberation, discourse.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the party politics has kind of captured our constitutional system. And you bring up Federalist 10 and you're right, it's so powerful. And Madison talks about factionalism and how we can set up a certain type of government with certain structures to, I wouldn't say eliminate, but to try to mitigate the effects of factionalism and parties and stuff like that. And I and I think the foundation's kind of there, but I don't think they anticipated what would come next, the next steps with people organizing and the rise of big parties. And of course, you have Adams' quote, how he feared this idea, and even Washington and others. They feared this division of the country into two big parties, or so it's like they knew, and he talked about it, but I don't know if the structures themselves were powerful enough to contain that party
Well,
movement.
there's two things that they didn't anticipate or understand. First, they didn't anticipate Alexander Hamilton letting the genie out of the bottle by creating the Federalist Party in an attempt to undo the very design of the Constitution and recreate it in his own image. And that forced the hand of Madison and Jefferson to create another party to combat it. And that's something that Madison was warning about. But what they really didn't understand and wasn't understood until the 20th century is Duverger's law. So you not only introduced party, but you had a system of elections that was pre-democratic before representation was ever studied, and that's winner take all in single member,
Right,
districts.
right,
And Duverger's law, which was probably the only social science law that ever came into existence, that's an actual law, establishes that in a single member majority district system,
right,
you will produce a two-party dynamic.
right.
And then the corollary to that is in multi-member seats without it, multiple parties can emerge.
Right. So the structures that kind of went into place and the party structures and the way we just run elections, it definitely favors the two-party system. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And while once upon a time, maybe it was somewhat functional, maybe it was semi-reasonable, and we could kind of get along. We've definitely reached a point where I look at the last 30 years especially, but we reached a point within the past few decades or longer where it's unsustainable. We're at sort of the natural rotten end of decay
Mhm.
to where the emotional tribalism they've basically broken the system and they prevent that political competition, and so there's like no way out of it. I mean, on the Radical Independent, I talk about electoral reforms because I'm all about free, fair, and competitive elections and reducing the power of the duopoly. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Another thing I think about sometimes is how in the early stages, talking about Madison, the formation, the Federalist Papers, the formation of the Constitution, I I don't think they effectively articulated the type of citizenship required for the system to work well.
Well, they
Like,
understood it and they wrote about it in several places, but you're right. In the Federalist Papers, it doesn't come across as
yeah,
central. Um, and that is a big failure of America if we have not cultivated citizenship.
right.
Um,
Like,
and, and, and
like,
party politics has pretty much prevented that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
let me just step back a second to, you know, in the past it wasn't as bad, but it was bad. But there were norms of political norms that politicians followed, but they followed it, voluntarily over time. And this, it escalates, on a rapid scale once it starts going. Once parties learn the tricks, evade that, and get out
yeah,
of that system of norms, the norms break down and disappear altogether. Today, we don't have them at all.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's a de-evolution. Are there any other people groups, Substacks? Is there anybody else that's kind of advocating sort of similar ideas as you?
Well, I've been out of the loop for a while because I was taking care of my father for 10 years, but Rob Ritchie at the center, I can't remember what the institution he has is the Proportional Representation Society.
Oh
Oh,
yeah. Okay.
uh, Fair Vote.
Yeah.
Rob Ritchie does a lot. Has a wealth of knowledge, and he's related to a 19th century proponent of proportional representation in
All right.
America, who wrote one of the main treatises of it. But I don't know many others.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think of sortition? Are you familiar with that idea? That's something that I've kind of been dabbling in more and more.
Well, the
The
ancient
idea
Greeks
of
used
like,
it.
huh?
The ancient Greeks used it.
Yeah, yeah. The idea of basically having some sort of structured lottery system where qualified people would just be randomly selected for certain positions, maybe even legislative positions, stuff like that. It just kind of bypasses the whole party thing completely. I kind
Yeah,
of like the idea of sortition.
especially at a local level, I think it could
Yes,
work.
yes. I feel like that's where it's got to
Um,
start.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So why Substack out of all the different places out there between, you got LinkedIn, you got Facebook, you have so many different options. I'm just curious why you decided to go with Substack.
Well, I wasn't sure where to start, so I created a Substack, and I'm about when I publish the next uh, piece, I'll create a Medium
Okay,
account that'll
Medium.
that mirror it.
Yeah.
I think those tend to be the ones that are most seriously taken.
Yeah, they're a little bit more thoughtful,
Yeah.
to put it lightly. Yeah. So what are the next steps on your Substack? Because I know it's relatively new. You just kind of started it, what, a few months ago, and
Well,
so there's some stuff. Hmm.
a month ago.
Yeah. So is it just plugging along and writing more pieces and
Yeah, I mean, basically, what I'm doing, I'm going back to what was my dissertation. There's a long story about what happened to me when I ran for political office and exposed corruption uh, and got attacked for doing that.
right?
I lost all my possessions, including all my writing and my dissertations. I was completely done with my PhDs. I had two PhDs going. I had done all the coursework and all the exams, and was just waiting to turn in my dissertation. And my political science dissertation was on this subject.
Hmm.
And I, I've toyed a number of times of getting back to rewriting that, and so I decided I was going to rewrite that in two forms. Um, and make a serious effort at it. I was going to write an academic monograph and a political manifesto about the history and philosophy of parties and the problem of parties and the Constitution and democracy. And so I decided to use Substack as a means to get the ideas out there. And what I'll do is I'll write small pieces that add up in total to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
whole.
yeah. That's what a lot of people do. I've talked to, I don't know, half dozen people on Substack, and they do their writings, and what they end up doing is taking the past 10 or 12 that they did and make an ebook or something out of it. So it's basically like leading up to a larger product, basically. So I feel like that's pretty common.
For example, the next piece that I've been sitting on it. I haven't completed it, but I basically introduced the problem as political science has perpetuated it by taking a recent book that tries to resurrect the myth of responsible party. Now, I don't
Uh,
know if you know what responsible party model, the party government school of thought was, but in the 40s and 50s, there was a movement within political science to create a cabinet style government like England
right,
and
right.
a British party model of of government, with party government being the absolute majoritarian system, um, giving all power within government to one majority party and letting them basically pass their agenda unrestricted. And a political scientist named Ian Shapiro a few years ago resurrected the myth of responsible parties,
Hmm.
and so I figured that would be a good introduction into where some of this is headed.
Right.
um, some of the problems of how what we have to overcome. We have to overcome not only Duverger's law, not only the habits and culture of American
Yeah.
politics and citizens, but we have to overcome political scientists and political science, which even though they don't they didn't all follow the party government school. They all adopted within the dominant paradigm the notion, which was famously said by the father of the party government school, E. Schatzsnyder, that basically democracy is unknowable without parties, and parties created democracy.
Yeah, they
And
just
so
kind of they just
party,
kind of all accepted it as that's the
yeah,
foundation. That's our operating system. Yeah.
parties are necessary, they're good, they're essential, and only a two-party system will work.
Yeah.
Multiple parties is bad.
Right.
That was another part of their assumptions, and so we have a lot to overcome if we ever want to fix the problem.
Yeah, definitely. Systemic and that social cultural aspect and the academic. I mean, it's a big mountain, to say the
So
least.
what people don't they don't really recognize, because they're not being taught this, is that for 2,000 years, party was considered anathema to good government, starting especially with Aristotle, who basically created political science in terms of this the serious study of the topic,
Right.
not the scientific
Yeah, political philosophy.
method. But and it wasn't until the 20th century, and particularly the mid 20th century, it started right around the turn of the century with people like Woodrow Wilson, that they began to abandon the antithesis of parties to good government. And what people also don't realize is that around that time in the mid 20th century, political science redefined democracy, taking all the democracy out of the term and leaving just an empty shell of a word.
Mm.
They took, popular sovereignty was removed. The people aren't supposed to rule. The people can't rule, political scientists believe. Something I call the mismeasure of political man. And they removed the essential part of democracy, which Aristotle started his political science by pointing out, which was, all the prior thinkers to Aristotle who were wondering what the best form of government was, what the best constitution, kept asking, who rules? One, the few, or many?
Yeah.
And what Aristotle argued is they're missing the point. The point is for what end, and that is the common good.
Yeah.
And so you can have democracy, or the many rule, the people rule in both a good and corrupt form, just
Yeah,
as you can
exactly.
have,
Yeah.
and so the definition of democracy was rewritten, particularly by an economist from Germany, from Austria, I think, named Schumpeter, and he defined it as being the competition between elites, and the people just having nothing more participate than to choose between those two competing elites.
Yeah, turn it into a team sport and just have the masses, choose, pick a side and that's it. But I like the idea you kind of bring it up and I talk about it on my page, like the bad form. People talk about, oh, this is terrible, this is good in these black and white terms, and I'm like, no, there's good forms and there's bad forms, and you have to, there's a little more nuance there, and you have to work towards, the right version, really.
Right.
Well, certainly some bold claims and interesting ideas. Once again, people can check out the Substack. Party is the problem. Charles, I want to thank you for the chat. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.